Hi guys, today we are going to talk about the United States as we always do, and our guest is Kirill Muzyka. He is a master student at LSE, London School of Economics and Political Science. He is pursuing his degree on global politics stream of political science. He's also a former teacher at Higher School of Economics. Hi Kirill, nice to have you today. Uh, so the subject of today's discussion will be broad, and we will start first from the history of the United States and how we came to the point we are now. Then we will briefly talk about the democracy decline that we are witnessing and we've been witnessing for the last 30 years in the United States. And for sure, we will talk about Donald Trump. So let's start with a quite vague and but nevertheless interesting question. Why is the United States different from other British former colonies like Australia, Canada? What have made the United States different in terms of its global destiny and made it able to become a global power?
Yeah, thank you, Luan. I think there is a clear answer to this question connected to the founding of both of all of these former British colonies. So the founding and how they became independent, right? So if we're looking to Canada or Australia, they're still parts of the Commonwealth, and the British King, British sovereign, is still the former head of state in both Canada and Australia. And there, they didn't fight some independence wars like the United States did. So it's completely different in terms of how they became independent. And it is kind of different how they were founded. So, first of all, Canada, at least part of Canada, wasn't originally a British colony. It was a French colony, and it came to the British to the British power in the 18th century, and it's much more complicated. And Australia too, like the United States history started with some dissidents, like religious dissidents in the British Empire, who wanted to leave the like metropolitan England and go to a free land. And they like since the start of their history, they had this sense of understanding that they are uh, different. They have their own destiny. There is also this. There is even this theoretical conception of manifest destiny, which means that it is destined for the United States to take under control the whole territory from the east coast to the west coast, which was used as a way to colonize the Indian territory in the United States to the west, the western frontier. And so the basic idea is that the United States' view of itself was always connected to its uniqueness and its understanding of itself as a freedom land, a liberty land, which has its own purpose in the world and which is different from the whole other world that existed at the moment. And that just isn't present in any other colony's history, British colonies at least. And so this whole idea of uniqueness combined with some old British traditions that were not present in the other colonies like Spanish or French made the United States different, at least in this respect, different in terms of their self-understanding. And for this reason, it made them different in terms of their future development as a country, because they always consider themselves to be unique and different.
So you're right, and now I start remembering that Australia originally was the place for the prisoners where
Yes.
it was sent. It was like British Siberia, and yeah, Canada was something completely different. It was a merger of francophone population and English speaking population. But nevertheless, what in your point of view made the United States intrinsically or externally able to possess that sort of importance for the rest of the world, because we also, I think, we have some other examples which are maybe close to the United States in North America. Mexico might be one of those examples, which makes it even more complicated to understand why the United States became that different. Because this sort of success that they have, that they got, is incredible. The Mexican state, as well as Brazil and other countries in Latin America, they were also built to a certain extent on the revolutionary ideas of liberation and some spiritually driven politics. What made it really distinct from the rest of Americas, in your point?
So I would say two things. One thing is about like why the United States is currently of such power and why everyone cares what's happening there. Well, it has maybe less to do with this like historical development in the story, how it's just developed. But mostly this happened in the 20th century, and it happened because, like, one, the United States, for all the reasons I'll talk later, um, already was an economic superpower in the beginning of the 20th century. And the second, it didn't have to fight wars as European countries had to fight them. So, like, yes, the United States was part of the World War One, and obviously it even was like involved in World War Two even harder. But in both of these wars, it didn't have war on its continental territory, and it wasn't as hard and as bloody for them as it was for other countries. And because it was already economically very strong, it obviously after the World War II became the like one of the world superpowers because it didn't suffer so much during the wars on the one hand, and on the other hand, it already had some economic strengths in itself. But the question is why it so happened that even like before the world wars, it already was considered to be quite important. And I think like the difference with Mexico and the difference with all other countries is that the United States was able to create a completely different political system from what the world knew before. Like if we just go back to the end of the 18th century, the United States really like quite quickly in the beginning of the 19th century became the country with universal man suffrage, which is like quite rare. We're just like taking in parentheticals the whole slavery things because it was obviously like we can't really call early United States a democracy because of all the slavery that existed there. But otherwise, we can say that there were like quite progressive changes in terms of who can vote, in terms of like the democratic structure of political system, the separation of powers, and all of these things. They were like quite different in comparison to all other world that existed at the moment, and all other like Latin American constitutions, for example, they relied in part of the American experience or the U.S. experience in this sense. So what I will say is that the what was different were first English traditions, which already had some democratic, some liberal element in it. Second, a reliance on Enlightenment theories that were like quite progressive and quite democratic in comparison to like especially when we're talking about the 18th century. And the third thing is that all of this just coexisted with the Revolutionary War that they had to fight. So all of this, taken together, produced a country which has really cares about individual liberties and like separation of power and democratic institutions. One thing, the second, and therefore is like it has quite a stable political system. Secondly, but secondly, and also importantly, it had this sense of uniqueness and separateness and its identity of like we are a unique country which is destined to succeed in this world. And all of this produced a country that was able to develop because of the strong institutions that existed there. Is one thing, and the second thing was that they felt that they are destined to be successful, and all of this produced a different outcome from other colonies or other countries that you talked about.
It's a very interesting analysis because you are taking three perspectives. Institutional perspective, which is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the economists from LSE, Acemoglu, has recently published a book which
Yeah.
was also nominated for Nobel Prize, saying like it is called "Why Some Nations Fail."
Why nations fail? Why
Why
nations fail?
nations fail, saying exactly the same thing that you are saying, that institutions and the supremacy of law make it possible for the nations to thrive, and that what really made it different, like the United States from the rest.
One of the theories, as I remember them, was that there are like these critical junctures when like something maybe not really important happened, and then everything goes in the other direction. And it's obviously true that the English institutions that existed like for a long time before the start of industrial revolutions, they were kind of connected with the economic development of the England and like the British Empire, and they also like came to the United States too, and they also played a role in the successful development of the United States. So this is important in terms of like the English system of law and the English system of government. It was different already when the United States was formed, and the United States, like people who formed them, considered themselves as like as British people. They cared about British traditions and British freedoms, and they wanted to. And one of the reasons the war was fought was because they thought that the British Empire denies them their rights as Englishmen, and they decided, okay, if you want to deny us them, we just will separate from you, and we will preserve our liberties that actually we had because we were part of your empire. So if you look at the American Bill of Rights and compare it to the British Bill of Rights, there are a lot of similarities because the American founders, they viewed themselves as the successors and like the true believers in the freedoms guaranteed to the citizens of the British Empire.
The Americans were extreme Brits in this.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, this is one of the reasons, right? Why, like, one of the conservative, like, one of the founders of the conservatism as ideology, Edmund Burke, he was quite critical about French Revolution, as everyone knows, but he was quite supportive of respect to the claims of American colonies for their rights, and he explained it like through conservative lens and through traditions. He said they are entitled to their rights because of like hundreds of years of traditions. And although he was like quite critical of the French Revolution, he supported the American colonists at the time, which is kind of strange. But there is the conservatives in the United States. They always claimed that the founding fathers weren't actually like some progressive liberals who transformed the whole system into more inclusive system of government. They were conservatives because they tried to preserve their traditions, which existed for centuries before, and from this sense, like conservatism was always entrenched in the United States system, as was liberalism too. So this kind of contradiction is what drives the whole political debate and political polarization in the United States, even right now.
Also, I can see that this movement towards expansionism was also intrinsically inherent to the United States, and was also part of British legacy, because when you are the only one liberated society, you tend to liberate others, and that's like the part of your probably identity. But at the same time, where is the place for the isolation in this identity set? If you have both revolutionary start, if you have institutions, liberal institutions, if you are more liberal than the mother empire you came from, and if you thrive economically, therefore, why are you looking for the splendid loneliness, as the Brits say?
So I'm not sure I completely got your question, but maybe you would just say to me, "Stop! You are talking something wrong." So what I was what I'm thinking about. Well, there is this paradox, right? We are looking at what Donald Trump is doing right now in the U.S. And his foreign policy is quite inconsistent.
I didn't imply Donald Trump. I mean,
Yeah, obviously, but it's
to see what isolation politics was part of the United States
yeah,
foreign policy for more than 100
just
something years before Donald Trump. And what was the reason for that? When from the start they became the self-concentrated, self-focused power, given all those factors that was enabling them to be the engine for the rest of the world. And what are the reason from the
I'm kind
start?
of trying to make a bridge here because all of these claims about Greenland and Canada and Panama Canal, they are connected to the answer to your question, I guess. So the United States was always when the United States was formed, and then in the first years, there was always a question what the foreign policy should be. And one of the foundational principles of the American foreign policy was the 1820 declaration by President James Monroe, which was called the Monroe Doctrine. And the idea was so President Monroe basically said, um, uh, we are saying to Europe, don't get involved in the business of American countries. And by American countries, he meant not only the United States, but the whole, both Americans, the North America and the South America. And his basic idea was that there were a lot of revolutionary movements at the time, anti-colonialism movements in the Latin American countries. And President Monroe was saying, it is our land, it is Americans' land, and don't get involved in it. This is none of your business to the sovereigns of European countries. And this doctrine actually drove the whole American foreign policy for like a century.
There was a security issue, making America feel insecure about Europeans probably try to like somehow intervene in their domestic issues, and they felt the weakness right at that moment, and that made them somehow avoid this interaction with the rest of Europe, because if you intervene, then you will be intervened as well. That was the reason you say, right? Security.
So it was security, but it was more than security, right? There was this ideological part of saying this is like the the West. This is different. You don't get involved here because here the people are fighting for freedom and independence, and we are kind of protecting them. So uh, the United States. So at the beginning, it was more or less just a declaration of like goal that this is our part of the world. Don't get involved. We probably won't involve in your business. But like in decades, in 19th century, it was reinterpreted, and its reinterpretation was basically this is our zone of influence. The whole Western like hemisphere. I don't know how to say it correctly. Yeah,
Hemisphere.
yeah. So the whole western part of the world, both Americas and even some islands in the Pacific, they are our zone of influence, and we don't want anyone to be involved here. And actually, we are preserving our rights to interfere in whatever business we find improper or we find important for us. And the Monroe Doctrine, as reinterpreted by later politicians, was basically used to, for example, occupy the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. And this is just one example, but there were like uh, dozens of them, because America had this expansionist movement in it in the late 19th century, but it was kind of bounded by the Western Hemisphere. They didn't really get involved in the European politics until World War One. Mostly, they just said, "This is not our business. We don't care. We don't really care. We care about what's happening in Americas, and we claim our right to do whatever we basically want here in Americas." And there were a lot of these stories about how they just interfered in political processes in many different countries across Latin America, and it was partly isolationism, because they said, "So what happens in Europe's none of our business."
What was
But
the reason why they claimed that? What do you say that Europe is not their business? Why you were claiming that that was part of their ideology? Because for me, it was, if if I got you right,
yeah,
it was mostly about the security, because all those revolutionary societies, they are very fragile, and they don't want to be involved in sort of like wars from the start. And we saw the same in France when the revolution happened in France. There was a period of time in the very beginning when they were not involved, and then expansionism started.
yeah,
Maybe
but the
in
United States, obviously, because it was a United States foreign policy doctrine, and it wasn't like at 1820, when the Monroe Doctrine was adopted. It wasn't like some newly formed revolutionary government, right? It existed already for 30 years, and it's like it already had a war with England in 1812, which was kind of very bad for the US. That was the first time when and the only time when the Washington was taken like by a foreign army in 1812, the Washington D.C. And my point is, at 1820 it was already like quite a formed country with its own problems and its own politics. And they were saying, yeah, there was a security element, but the security element was about like these revolutionary movements in Latin America. They were saying, just don't touch them. It's their countries. But there was this ideological point too, which was we brought the freedom light to the Western Hemisphere, and we are going to be here and to control order here in Americas. And later it became entrenched. It became broader and broader and broader. And instead of being just a message to Europeans, it became a message to all other countries there that we are here and they are the most important power, and just do whatever we want. Uh, and it was this end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, when it was like very popular, this idea that we can control everything, like all of these places like the Philippines, for example, that we can, I don't know, interfere in some political processes in Latin American countries. And so my general point is this was partly isolationism, but this was partly expansionism, and partly like this idea of American uniqueness still persisted at the time. But then, yeah, maybe just
yeah. So it's a very interesting point. Um, so my further question will be why the sort of responsibility of those who we've liberated idea of like control of Western Hemisphere, which which was augmented by the thing that they have liberated Western Hemisphere, right? Like the American Revolution was the driver for the revolution in South America, and that made them eligible to control, or at least to claim this um, like right to control Latin America, right? So what made this particular idea be shifted towards the global idea of global control and global liberty? Where is the point when they crossed this line, when the doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine, was never was no longer acceptable, and then like they broadened their like responsibility area.
Yeah, I would say it's an interesting process because it has like kind of different directions. Because one could argue that the idea that, but maybe not just Monroe Doctrine, maybe like this whole idea of manifest destiny and the
Yeah,
idea that we,
collective or collectively.
yeah, the idea is maybe maybe the idea is just we're bringing freedom to the world, and we are so good and such a great nation that we really should enlighten the whole world. There is this piece of it, which is kind of like the continuation of this expansionist logic that always, in some way, was present in the United States foreign policy. But I would add to this that there was kind of different tradition that was started by another American president, Woodrow Wilson, which is kind of liberal version of it. So Wilson was the president during the World War One, and he obviously he was a political scientist before he became like just professor in political science before he became the president, and he had a vision of the world, which he obviously proclaimed after the end of World War One in his 14 points. And his vision of the world was this liberal idealism. So he said that the politics should be based on a moral principle, and we should refuse like secret agreements, and we should stop colonization, and we should well, there were a lot of these just basically liberal pronunciations that we should all care about like in the independence of other countries and independence of colonies, but we also should be like more open to each other, and like the moral principles should be the most important thing that drives progress in international relations. And so the League of Nations, which is the predecessor of the United Nations that was created after the World War One, it was basically the Wilson's idea. We should create an international organization that will unite the whole world and where we will decide all questions peacefully after deliberation and with some kind of tension to the interests of other countries. But it generated an extreme backlash inside the United States because it was so different from the whole tradition of American foreign policy, which was kind of isolationist at the moment in this narrow sense of isolationism. And so Wilson wasn't even able to ratify the League of Nations agreement in the Senate, which said to him, no, sorry. The Republicans reclaimed the White House in 1920. And after that, there was like another peak of isolationist politics for the next 20 years. But although like President Wilson is obviously hated by most Republicans and like realist thinkers of international relations, we can't really say that his influence is just seated, because obviously his influence persisted after World War II, when the United States, in many different situations, still considered itself to be this moral light that should enlighten the whole world in terms of freedom and moral principle and liberal ideas. And this kind of goes back to the Wilsonian principles and the whole democratic, like the Democratic Party, foreign policy ideals. They are still kind of go back to Woodrow Wilson, while the Republican expansionism is more in line of this previous manifest destiny views. They're kind of more nationalistic than Wilsonian's moralism. And these are just different traditions of foreign policy. But before Trump, they kind of coexisted, and although there are differences, in principle, they're all about the same. They're all about like the power of our country should be high, and we should be influential. Why? Because one would say, "Oh, we just for the sake of our great country," and the other would say, "Oh, just for the sake of the free world." And this could be different justifications, but the foreign policy since the end of World War II never returned to isolationism. It was kind of the same in terms of the role of the United States as a moral light, or is it just like a destiny of the United States? Yeah, that's kind of it.
But during the Cold War, the Wilsonian understanding of the United States' role in the global affairs was the dominant, and for some reason, this power which is now seen, the Trumpism and this idea of Western Hemisphere as the only responsibility area of the United States. It was silent and it was invisible almost, if I'm not mistaken. So, what was the reason for that? What was the main factor making Wilsonian understanding dominant for more than 70 years, right?
I mean, it was silent, but it wasn't as silent as you could imagine. First of all, even during the Cold War, there were realist politicians, although they definitely weren't isolationist in any meaningful sense. But I kind of rejected this moral principle logic. The best example being the Nixon administration and Henry Kissinger, uh, who just relied on this realist logic to facilitate what is called in English by French word détente. I don't know. I'm not sure. I know how to say it in English because it is used most in French version. But this idea that the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union should become better, and also the relationship between the United States and China should become better. Nixon visited China, as everyone knows, and this was kind of the shift, this 180-degree turn in American foreign policy during the Nixon administration. And it wasn't isolationist, but it was realist, and it was like definitely contra any Wilsonian principle we could think about. So it was kind of more harder picture. There were no like true isolationists because everyone accepted that we are in a time of like the two areas of worlds, to like capitalism versus communism, free democracy versus authoritarianism, and everyone kind of accepted this distinction. But I wouldn't say that the foreign policy was such united. There were differences, obviously, and the expansionist logic which came to Vietnam War obviously generated its own backlash because a lot of people were like, kind of skeptical that the Vietnam War was the right decision to start with and how it turned out to be. It didn't generate true isolationists, but some isolationistish things obviously increased in the US.
They cropped up. So we can say that the Soviet threat made Wilsonian understanding the dominant for this period of time. And when this threat disappeared, then the true American foreign policy came, and we now are witnessing it.
This is much more recent development, right? Like
It
in 1990s and in 2000s, it wasn't really a question. It is a recent development, and it is kind of generated not only by the fall of Soviet Union, but by another backlash against foreign policy. Haven't like some risky decisions by the Bush administration, like the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War. Then, like it doubled during the Obama years, the Syrian War, and then just kind of generated a lot of skepsis about this mode of American foreign policy, uh, which returned with much more force. That's isolationist types. But I would add to this that these, well, if we're talking about Trump already, I don't know, maybe we are not, but Trump kind of unites different traditions of foreign policy, which makes it even more crazier, right? Uh, like there is this isolationist part, but there is also this expansionist in terms of like 19th century part. We'll take on Greenland, we'll take on Canada, Panama Canal, whatever else. And this is just again like returning to this reinterpreted Monroe Doctrine and this whole expansionist in the 19th century. And and with respect to, for example, his relationships with Putin, it's definitely has this Nixon Kissinger flair, like this idea that We really shouldn't fight these moral battles. We should just try to negotiate, try to find common ground. We really don't really care about like human rights violations or whatever else. We are like true hard realists. And so all of these traditions kind of are united in Trumpian Republican view, which is still not totally shared by every Republican in Congress, but like Trumpian foreign policy view kind of unites these three different things.
Eclecticism. It is called which doesn't make any sense for me, at least because it's inconsistent. But anyways, uh, if you since you've started talking about Trumpism and the foreign policy of Trump's administration, so I think it is necessary to talk about the decline of democratic institutes in the United States and the probable interconnection between those two phenomena. Because, in my point of view, those two are really intrinsically connected. Because when you were talking about the first steps of the United States in global politics, driven by the idea of their democratic values as the unique and the best of the best in the existing world, as a justification for further expansion. It did make sense, because if you are the best society in the world, you are kind of morally approved to intervene into others' affairs. But since you are experiencing decline in your values, in your democratic institutions, etc., it is probably better to concentrate on yourself, on your Western Hemisphere, etc. So probably, just my hypothesis, probably the shrinking American uh, mundo americano, the world of like the responsibility, American responsibility, is somehow connected with the shrinking American democracy. Maybe it is somehow. So, what's your thought about?
I'm just thinking that your explanation would have worked if we are talking about like the foreign, what the European Union thinks about the US. And obviously, like because obviously the rulers of the United States, like Trump, don't think the values are in decline. They think they're making America great again. After all. Uh, so I think it may work if we're talking about like how foreign countries perceive the United States. But the United States obviously perceive itself as a defender of like the true freedom values. Like, have you heard the J.D. Vance speech in Munich? Because this is truly like he still thinks that he represents the country that really cherishes the democratic and liberty values, and the Europe is one that goes to the wrong way. So I must say this can explain if Europe would say, "Oh, just whatever you say, you are not true democracy anymore." But the United States obviously doesn't think about themselves in this way. What I would say is that so on the one hand, it's too early to tell what will happen in terms of a democratic values and like democracy in the United States. There are like some very alarming events in just recent weeks in terms of like the due process violations, possible due process violations when like immigrants were sent to El Salvador just in the middle of the night without any court order, without any opportunity to claim that they are innocent, and other events like this that are really about and also this war between Trump and courts, which is generated right now when he calls for impeachments of judges who disagree with him, and there are questions whether he defied some court orders. So there is obviously a question whether there is some democratic backsliding in the United States, but I think it's too early to tell. What I would say is that the polarization in the United States, which is kind of internal thing that happened there during the last decades, uh, it finally got to the point where there is a polarization in foreign policy too, because there used to be none in like even 2000s or 2010s, although there were like some kind of differences between parties. Some were more hawkish, some were more like negotiations peaceful oriented, but in general there were some consensus things. All right, so some consensus thinks Europe is our most important ally. Russia is adversary. China is alarming, and since Trump won, it is also the most important adversary. Uh, and even like with respect to Israel, for example, where there wasn't really some kind of division. Everyone and mainstream politics agreed that Israel is the best ally and we should support it. And so these were the kind of principles that united the whole elites. But now there seems to be they seem not to exist anymore, and there is kind of increasing division between Republican foreign policy views and Democratic foreign policy views. Russia is, I think, the best example, but it is not the only one. Like the NATO thing, the question whether Europe is actually allies and not some nasty second level, not really friends, as Trump views them. Whether whether we should talk, there are like a lot of these questions. Whether like again, Canada, Greenland, Panama Canal, these all things are kind of things that divide American elites into camps. I would just give one example. So, current Secretary of State Marco Rubio was confirmed by the Senate 99-0. Everyone voted for him, every Republican and every Democrat. So, my bet is this will never happen again because everyone suppose that Rubio is part of an elite that really shares some basic foreign policy views that kind of existed for decades. But it turns out that he maybe not really. And so this means that there is no consensus on foreign policy anymore, which is kind of like the logical conclusion of polarization. So internal division touches on foreign policy once more.
So that once again makes me think about the reasons, the true reasons of this race polarization, making me think that the thing that made the United States stick together was the external threat, probably the Soviet one. And now when it no longer exists, and with this China also, of course, China is a threat, but it's not that big and that evident as it was in terms of the Soviet Union, probably. So if that makes any sense, probably that was the reason why the polarization started in 1990s, right? And my question is, what's the probable trajectory? Where is this whole thing going towards? Because we saw the attempt of coup, first time ever, if I'm not mistaken, in American history, when the Donald Trump's administration, Donald Trump didn't recognize the outcomes of the last elections, and now we are witnessing the probable constitutional crisis in the U.S. So if it all goes towards this line, let's say, what will be the outcome for the foreign policy?
I just want to react to your first thought about the security thing, because I think you may be right that this was kind of a factor, but I wouldn't call it the reason, because foreign policy is important for the US, but it is not as important as you may imagine, because we as people living in other countries, we kind of view it, oh, they are thinking about foreign policy every day, and this is the most important thing for them. But in reality, American politicians are thinking about how to be reelected, and the electorate doesn't really care about foreign policy unless there is some major cataclysm or catastrophe happening, like Vietnam War or Iraq War, when it really became like part of an agenda. but most voters don't really care about this. So I would say this was a factor of elite unification, but polarization started for many different reasons, not only because of like some foreign policy threats, but they were present or they said it after the end of the Soviet Union. But about the future, so it's hard to really predict future. But I would say about internal things first, and then to about external things. So internally, you said whether like there is a constitutional crisis right now. I would say that the term constitutional crisis is used as a as one way to describe what's happening right now. But I would say that we really aren't now in a situation where there is a real, undeniable constitutional crisis, because what Trump is doing is unprecedented in many ways. But still, it didn't come to a situation where he really just, I don't know, closes Congress, closes courts, doesn't follow the ruling of the Supreme Court or whatever. So I'm just kind of in this, or decided to run for the third term, although it's obviously forbidden by the Constitution. So I would say it is kind of the beginning of possible constitutional crisis, and the question is what happens next. And I would say that there are two ways to predict this. One way, well, this will be remembered as a time where executive really claimed enormous constitutional powers, extra constitutional powers. This already happened before. President Nixon did the same. It all ended up with Watergate, and after that, Congress kind of restricted presidential powers. So we can speculate that this could be remembered just as a normal period of time, kind of not really normal, but more or less normal, if the election ran its way and courts rein in a little bit the executive power. And if Democrat wins in 2028, the power is just peacefully transferred. But there is a possibility and there is a risk that it is not what will happen. And the possibility is because, just if you look at Trump's appointments, he appointed to the positions that are connected with force, like Attorney General, the head of the Justice Department, or the Department of Defense, or the Federal Bureau of Investigations. He appointed really real loyalists, like people who are just loyal to him personally, most of the time. Some of them are more qualified, some less, but so they are like personal friends, and this is a risk, right? If a Republican candidate doesn't win 2028 election, will these loyalists just peacefully transfer power or not? And this is the risk that I think is important to follow through, because it could be disastrous for American democracy if the 2020 election repeats itself, but Trump refuses to give power to a winning Democrat, and is supported by his circle, which wasn't the case in 2020. But that said, I would say this is like the very slow process. We can't really say America is now not a democracy anymore. Well, it still is, but there are some alarming events. Maybe we should look at it. Maybe this will all cause some healing at some time. Maybe at some time people will realize that the political system doesn't work. Because there is a reason why the executive is doing all of these things. Like President Trump is doing this, and President Biden did also some things that are not really allowed by laws, but he did them anyway. Because the reason why it happens, because Congress is inefficient. It doesn't work. It can't pass really any substantial laws because of filibuster, because of the party division, because they can't really agree with each other. That's one thing. Then the executive has to claim some power that is not exercised by Congress, and so this whole thing is just doesn't work for the last decades. So maybe the thing that everyone will learn after that will be, oh, we should really somehow reform the system, or we should make it working. But with respect to external things, I believe that although there are possibilities that Trump will be reined in terms of internal politics, foreign policy is really a prerogative of the president, and he can do whatever he wants, basically whatever he wants. So there is really almost no way to force president to make some foreign policy decisions, even if like Congress disagrees with him. So I think he really could change substantially the foreign policy trajectory of the United States. And the real question, I guess, is what will be the reaction? How Europe, primarily, will react to what Trump is doing. We already see some things happening, like Germany amended its constitution to allow more defense spending, and the UK is doing the same, like in terms of an increase of defense spending. And they're kind of all talking about we should be more independent, we shouldn't rely on Trump, we shouldn't rely on the US. But the question is, to what scale will really Europe claim its independence from the US? To what scale they will try to ameliorate, like try to to alleviate Trump, or to what way they will fight him, like to confront him and say, no, we really want to do what you want, we would do what we want. And the question is how deep the division between Europe and the US will be, and what the reaction to his actions will be. Because I guess this is the most important question for the next years, how the new like geopolitical situation between major countries will look like. And it could like extremely different after 4 years of Trump. And we could just, go like look back and ask ourselves, like, what just happened? Could we have imagined this 5 years ago? The answer would be no, but Trump could really substantially change American foreign policy.
So he has the cards, as he.
yeah, he has the cards. Some cards, obviously, because he doesn't have control over the whole world.
In terms of foreign policy, he has the cards.
Yes.
So, anyways, thank you for
Thank you very much.
It was very profound, interesting analysis, and we touched upon the entire history of the US, which is crazy. Yeah, to our subscribers, follow us. We will. I don't know. This part we will re-record. So thank you for watching us, and bye.
Bye.